Hello, and welcome to the Cryptocurrency News Channel. Today we're going to look at some honest to good numbers, not like speculation, but actual numbers of X-rapid volume. And we can see the growth. I was actually wrong a couple of days ago about the volume. It looks like X-rapid volume is actually in the lower hundreds of thousands most days, especially except on weekends where it's kind of like in the tens of thousands. And on better days, it's actually like in the higher hundreds of thousands. We're going to compare it with Bitso's own volume on the XRP MXN corridor. Now, the weird thing is, like, Bitso's XRP MXN corridor has not actually risen in ranking in terms of like the total ranking versus other corridors. And I expected if XRapid was actually going to be such a significant part of its volume, it would actually rank higher. But it's still in like the 80 to 120 in terms of like rank in terms of volume. So I don't really know exactly how much volume, but we have some good numbers and data to actually study this. We don't have to just approximate. Well, we do have to approximate a little bit, but we actually do have some raw data to actually work with. This is something that actually tracks Bitstamp to Bitso volume. Bitstamp is the American side, Bitso is the Mexican side. So any transactions from Bitstamp, movements from Bitstamp to Bitso have a decent chance to corroborate into X-rapid volume. And what this does interestingly show, it doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% X-rapid volume, but there's a good chance because like X-rapid sends the XRP from Bitstamp to Bitso. So what this actually shows is how much potential X-rapid volume there is every day. Now, I'm not really sure at what percentages is going to be X-rapid volume. I mean, the title says X-rapid volume, but if I look at some of these breaks, like this is going to be around like 90% of what Bitso's volume on this corridor is, and I don't really think it's that big, is that high of a percentage. But it's probably pretty high because if you look at the spikes from the 22nd and the 23rd, they actually match up very well with the actual volume on the 22nd to 23rd. So because of the low volume surrounding these days, I'm willing to bet that a decent amount of this volume here is due to Bitstamp and Bitso. Now, what I have here is the volume from May to August, to September, actually from May to now. And if you actually look around here on July 31st, August 1st is when they really first announced that they're going to actually start using X-rapid for the corridor. And this is significant because, yes, even though the volume on the Mexican corridor isn't nearly as high as here in the middle of May, it's still much more consistent than any other period in time. Yes, it might not look like a significant rise in volume compared to, like volume at the end of June before they turn it on, or volume even less than volume in May, but it's much more consistent. Yes, there are like really big downs, especially on the weekends and on some weekdays, but it's a lot more consistent, meaning there is something behind it that's actually generating the volume. So that actually corroborates pretty well because this is I think this was kind of a test. And then here you basically have consistent volume that's consistently growing from week to week. Now, if you actually look at the yearly volume, I'm going to pull this here. If you actually look at the yearly volume from 2019, it was actually growing even before X-rapid. It was actually growing before X-rapid even turned on. And as I've said, like the Bitso ranking for XRP MXN hasn't really climbed in the rankings in terms of volume. But you can see here that it was low at the beginning of the year, started to climb in April and May, and continued to climb. But it actually evened out a lot after X-rapid turned on, meaning that there's a baseline for amount of volume, and that's the X-rapid volume. And plus, like I've shown here in from July to now, these kind of like stickouts, they match very well with the volume here. Like if you look at September 4th, for instance, and you look at September 4th, you can see that that big volume, this giant volume actually corresponds with this large bar volume. Of course, this one isn't quite as significant compared to the others as this one, but that's because the Bitso corridor actually has a decent amount of volume by itself and not only via X-rapid. So if you actually look at this volume, you can see that most days, even most days close to now, there's some good days, like this day is barely 100,000. This day is about 130,000. This day is probably like closer to 4 or 500,000. This day is almost $1 million in volume on XRapid. This day is not even is roughly $25,000 in volume. So it varies by day. And look, if you look at September 3rd, that's September 8th actually. If you look at September 3rd, there wasn't much volume on Bitso either. So you can see that this XRapid volume, or at least the volume that's Bitstamp sending Bitso, does have a large effect on the overall volume on Bitso. So that does signal a decent amount of XRP traffic. Now, like I said, most of them coming up to here, they're probably more around the, I would say, $200,000 to $300,000 area, which is much higher than I originally thought XRapid volume was at this point. Now remember, not all of this is XRapid volume. Some of them are just going from Bitstamp to Bitso, and this is going to be, Mercury FX is also sending this as well, but you can see most of this is probably MoneyGram. So you can see the volume starting to ramp up. It hasn't affected prices yet, so you know that $1 million or $2 million, a couple $1 million a day is not really going to affect price any. You need much higher volumes to actually affect price. But you can see that the bars actually match up very well with this. And on some days, it's in the upper hundreds of thousands. Most days, it's in the lower hundreds of thousands, and that's what we're looking at right now. And remember, this graph will actually be updated every day, so you can keep track of it. The confusing part of this is that the Bitstamp to Bitso number of transactions or record count is also in blue here, and actually it's kind of like a reverse correlation. It's like the less transactions there are from Bitstamp to Bitso, the more volume there is, and that's very strange because I would guess remittances, like I would actually guess like remittances are about the same amount each, but you can see here that when there were 250 records, the volume was only about 1.1 million. When there is actually when there's only 46 records, now the volume's 2.6 million. And on September 4th, there was 3.5 million volume, whereas there was only 55 records, which is kind of weird because that makes each record about 50,000 XRP or about $16,000. And that is actually a lot more than an actual remittance, which is what MoneyGram actually does. So it could be that there's whales sending XRP from Bitstamp to Bitso that doesn't have to do with XRapid. But I would actually think that a lot of this, like at least a lot of this even volume, actually has to do with XRapid. But the number of records, if you compare it with the the number of records with the amount with the total volume of XRP, doesn't really make all that much sense because it seems like less records actually makes more volume, which makes 0 sense at all to me, especially on these giant spikes. Now, these giant spikes might be like people sending large amounts of money over XRapid. And also, you can see like these smaller spikes where I think these are weekends, but I would actually think that weekends would actually see larger amounts of traffic because people work on the weekdays. They have time to go to MoneyGram or whatever during the weekends and actually send the money. So I find that a little bit strange. So I'm guessing there might actually be a couple of business payments in XRapid as well. But overall, you can definitely see that there's a decent amount of volume in XRapid. Some of it probably has to do with that the exchange has picked up volume over the year itself anyways. But there's definitely XRapid volume, and you can actually keep track of this every day just by going to this page and looking at the volume. I'll probably be providing like weekly or monthly analysis of this volume, but you can see it's actually been growing pretty nicely since July 31st, and it's continuing to grow right now, slowly, but it's continuing to grow, and we're seeing spikes of volume close to $1 million sometimes. Now, I don't think this is all our XRapid volume. If you look, like I said, if you look at September 4th, and you look at the number of records or number of transactions, that doesn't really make that much sense. There's going to be a couple of big business payments in there, or just some whales moving from Bitstamp to Bitso. There's going to be a couple of whales just moving from Bitstamp to Bitso in terms of volume. But I think since these bars match up so well in terms of like volume at Bitso itself, I do believe they do heavily represent a lot of what, at least proportionally, what XRapid volume is actually coming through. And there is a decent amount of volume. So Garlinghouse, like the whole thing about $1 billion per day at the end of 2020, if it's per day, that has a chance of coming true if they can establish a whole lot more corridors. Now, they're less than a million. They're significantly less than averaged $1 million a day right now, which means they would have to grow 3,000-4,000 times within a year to get that $1 billion per day at the end of 2020. Can they do it? Maybe. And $1 billion a day should start to actually sort of affect price. So I still wouldn't expect too much of a price rise until after the end of 2020. But you can see that there is good progress in these smaller corridors with XRP volume. And XRapid is actually slowly starting to ramp up even now. So that is the report for today. Let me know what you think. And check out this graph every once in a while if you want real actual numbers and not like all the hype that actually comes out each day. And see how it's actually, the XRapid volume is how it's actually expanding, especially in the Mexican corridor. The Filipino corridor seems to be a lot smaller, which is weird because there seems to be like a lot more. There's actually just as many, if not more, transactions in the Filipino corridor, but the volume is like tiny compared to the Mexican corridor. That sounds weird to me. That seems really weird to me, but that's just the way things are right now. Remember, the Mexican corridor total from US to Mexico is about $130 million a day, I think. But that's not only MoneyGram. That's pretty much all transfers, banks, Western Union, otherwise. So keep track of this corridor because this is the only real data we have. We don't have official numbers from Ripple citing XRapid use, but we do actually have this data that's kind of like pretty good approximation of what XRapid volume is, once again, because it matches up very well with Bitso's own data. So that is the report for today. Let me know what you think, and let me know what you think of these awesome volume graphs. Thank you and have a nice day. And remember, subscribe and hit that like button.